There comes a moment when silence becomes too heavy, when endurance becomes too costly, when the soul whispers with a voice that cannot be ignored, "No more." It is in that moment that transformation begins, not as rebellion against the world, but as a return to the self that has always longed to be free. The power of the boundary begins in silence, long before the words "no more" are ever spoken aloud. It arises from the quiet recognition that something within us has been sacrificed again and again on the altar of pleasing others, of surviving circumstances, of belonging at the expense of authenticity. The boundary is not merely a line drawn in the sand, it is the very architecture of the soul reclaiming its structure. To say "no more" is not an act of aggression against the world, but a declaration of fidelity to oneself. It is a refusal to continue betraying what the heart has whispered for years, a refusal to let the spirit shrink under the weight of demands that are not aligned with its truth. The world often conditions us to believe that boundaries are selfish, that to guard our space is to withhold love, that to resist what wounds us is to become unkind. Yet, the deeper reality is that without boundaries, love itself becomes poisoned. A river without banks loses direction, spilling everywhere until it evaporates into nothingness. In the same way, a self without boundaries dissolves into others until it no longer remembers its own shape. To reclaim that shape is an act of profound courage. It means daring to disappoint those who thrive on our compliance, daring to disturb the familiar patterns that have defined our identity, daring to step into the unknown territory of becoming whole. When we finally utter the words "no more," we are not speaking only to others. We are speaking to the parts of ourselves that tolerated, endured, and allowed. We are confronting the inner agreements we made in silence, the bargains where we traded authenticity for acceptance, voice for approval, and dignity for peace. The boundary is not a wall built against life. It is a gate through which only what is aligned with our truth may pass. It protects the sacred fire within, ensuring it is not dimmed by the winds of exploitation or neglect. Boundaries are also thresholds of transformation. On one side lies the version of ourselves who lived in captivity, bending and breaking to meet the expectations of others. On the other side stands the emerging self, upright, whole, radiant in its authenticity. Saying "no more" is the crossing of this threshold. It is the moment when the old identity collapses and the new begins to breathe. This crossing is never easy. It feels like death because, in a sense, it is. It is the death of compliance, the death of silence, the death of the patterns that chained us. Yet every death here is a seed of new life, and every "no more" uttered becomes the soil where self-respect blossoms. The power of the boundary also lies in its permanence. It is not a temporary outburst or a fleeting act of resistance. Once spoken from the depth of the soul, it reshapes the very way we live. It realigns relationships, dismantles illusions, and clears the ground for truth to grow. The world may resist, people may retreat, and old structures may crumble, but what remains is unshakable. The recognition that we are worthy of respect, care, and love that does not demand our diminishment. To say "no more" is to awaken the soul from its slumber and allow it to stand in its full strength. It is to return home to oneself after years of exile. It is to draw the line not in anger, but in reverence for the self that deserves to be whole. It is not an act of separation from love, but the very condition that makes real love possible. In the boundary lives the seed of freedom, and in freedom, the uncrushable self begins to emerge. The shadow of self-neglect hides itself in subtle gestures, almost invisible in the flow of daily life. It appears when we silence the voice that longs to speak, when we nod in agreement though our heart aches in resistance, when we give beyond our capacity because we fear being unloved if we dare to hold something back. This shadow creeps in quietly, wearing the mask of humility, kindness, or patience, but beneath it lies the truth that we have abandoned ourselves in order to be accepted by others. Every time we ignore our needs, our feelings, or our truth, we carve a wound into our own being, and the shadow deepens. Self-neglect is not always dramatic. It does not always come in the form of great betrayals or open mistreatment. Often it comes through small choices, repeated over time, until they become patterns. We stay in conversations that diminish us. We carry responsibilities that are not ours. We say yes when our whole being is crying no. These little betrayals accumulate like dust on the soul until the mirror of our inner self becomes clouded. We no longer recognize who we are because we have been shaped by the expectations and demands of others rather than by the truth that lives within. This shadow thrives in silence. The more we ignore it, the stronger it grows. It feeds on the stories we tell ourselves to justify the neglect, that we are being good, that sacrifice is noble, that love requires self-erasure. Yet the truth is that no genuine love can exist where one must vanish to make the other comfortable. To recognize the shadow is to shine a light on these justifications and see them for what they are, chains disguised as virtues. Recognition is the first act of liberation. Until we name the shadow, we remain its prisoner, endlessly repeating the same patterns of surrendering ourselves to keep peace or avoid rejection. The body and mind carry the evidence of this neglect. Fatigue that lingers, emotions that feel heavy, a quiet sadness that never quite leaves. All of these are signs that the soul is being starved. The shadow whispers in these symptoms, urging us to notice, to awaken, to remember. It is not cruel, for even the shadow carries a purpose. Its role is to remind us of the places where we have given away our power and to point toward the necessity of reclaiming it. Without the shadow, we might never realize how much of ourselves we have abandoned. Awakening from self-neglect begins with small acts of remembrance. Listening to the body when it says enough, giving space to the emotions we try to suppress, daring to ask what we truly want and honoring the answer. These are not luxuries, they are lifelines. Each act of attention weakens the shadow's grip. Each choice to honor ourselves is a candle lit in the darkness. Slowly, the accumulation of neglect gives way to an accumulation of care, and the mirror begins to clear. We start to see ourselves not as fragments of others' expectations, but as whole beings deserving of respect and love. The shadow of self-neglect does not vanish instantly. It lingers, testing us, tempting us to fall back into old habits of silence and self-erasure. But once we have seen it clearly, we cannot return to ignorance. The recognition itself becomes strength. We learn that neglecting ourselves is not an act of love but a denial of it, that every time we betray our own needs, we dim the light we are meant to offer the world. By turning toward the shadow, acknowledging it, and choosing differently, we begin to transform it into wisdom. The shadow, then, no longer controls us. Instead, it guides us toward the birth of a deeper, indestructible self-love. The inner flame of worth is not something that the world can hand to us, nor is it something that can be taken away once it has been truly ignited. It lives in the deepest chamber of the soul, waiting to be remembered. Many people spend years seeking worth outside themselves, in the approval of parents, the validation of lovers, the recognition of society. Yet, all of these sources are fragile, because they rest on conditions. Approval can be withdrawn, validation can be denied, recognition can fade. When worth is tied to these shifting tides, the self becomes as unstable as the external forces that sustain it. The flame of worth, however, is different. It does not flicker according to the moods of others. It burns steadily once we turn inward and recognize that being is enough, that existence itself carries value beyond comparison, beyond negotiation. To awaken this flame is to step into a truth that many resist, that worth is inherent and unearned. It doesn't require perfection, achievement, or constant sacrifice. The child is worthy before it speaks a word, before it accomplishes a task, before it wins anyone's love. This original worth never disappears, though it may be buried under layers of shame, rejection, or neglect. The flame cannot be extinguished. It can only be covered, hidden beneath the ashes of experience. Our task is not to create worth, but to uncover it, to brush away the ashes until the light shines again. This flame grows from authenticity. When we live according to others' expectations, when we mold ourselves to fit a world that does not honor our truth, the flame is smothered. We feel small, dependent, restless. But when we begin to live from within, choosing words, actions, and paths that align with our essence, the flame grows brighter. Authenticity fuels it, and with every act of courage to be real, the light becomes stronger. It is not arrogance to honor this flame. It is reverence for the truth that we are not accidents of existence, but carriers of unique meaning. The inner flame of worth also requires courage. To believe in one's inherent value in a world that profits from insecurity is an act of rebellion. Everywhere, we are told we must earn love, prove success, perfect appearance, or meet standards set by others. These messages are designed to keep the flame dim, to convince us that our worth is conditional. Yet the courage to resist these lies, to declare oneself worthy without external justification, is what turns the small spark into an unshakable fire. It is courage that refuses to shrink, even when misunderstood, criticized, or abandoned. No storm can extinguish a flame that is rooted in the truth of being. People may reject, betray, or fail to see us, but the flame remains untouched, for it does not belong to them. It is not fed by their recognition, but by our own decision to honor it. This realization frees us from the endless cycle of seeking approval. We no longer beg for love or contort ourselves for acceptance. Instead, we become steady, carrying a light that shines regardless of the weather around us. When the flame of worth burns brightly, it transforms how we relate to life. We no longer settle for relationships that diminish us, work that depletes us, or environments that crush our spirit. We know we deserve better, not because of pride, but because we honor the sacredness within. This recognition draws healthier connections, truer paths, deeper joy. The world itself responds differently to those who walk in the light of their own worth. They no longer chase belonging, they embody it. The inner flame of worth, once awakened, is indestructible. It may flicker in moments of doubt, but it will never go out, for it is sustained not by circumstance but by truth. To tend this flame is the highest act of self-love, for from it flows everything else: dignity, courage, freedom, and the unshakable knowledge that no one and nothing has the power to crush what is eternal within us. Breaking the cycle of repetition is one of the most profound acts of liberation a soul can undertake. Life has a mysterious way of presenting the same lessons in different forms, circling us back to the same wounds until we are willing to face them. The same kind of relationship, the same feeling of abandonment, the same weight of betrayal, the same patterns of silence and suppression appear like echoes, repeating themselves until recognition dawns. This cycle is not a punishment, but a teacher, showing us where we have abandoned ourselves, where we continue to give our power away, where we are called to awaken. Until we rise and say no more, the wheel keeps turning, and we remain caught in its motion, These cycles often begin in the earliest chapters of our lives. A child who learns that love must be earned may grow into an adult who repeatedly chooses partners that withhold affection. A soul that was silenced in youth may unconsciously step into spaces where its voice is ignored. The repetition is not coincidence, but a mirror held up by life, reflecting the wound until it can be healed. Every new encounter with pain is an invitation to see clearly, to recognize that the external pattern is born from an inner agreement we once made, that we must accept less than we deserve, that we must stay silent to be safe, that we must endure to be loved. The cycle continues until the moment of decision. To break it requires more than anger or resistance. It requires deep awareness. We must be willing to step back and ask, why does this pattern keep finding me? What am I allowing? What am I believing? What am I repeating within myself that calls this lesson again and again? The answers are rarely comfortable. They reveal how often we have mistaken survival for love, compliance for peace, and endurance for strength. Yet in this revelation lies the key. Once the wound is seen clearly, once the pattern is named, we are no longer blindly trapped. We stand at the edge of choice. The act of saying no more is the breaking point, the place where the wheel of repetition finally halts. It is a refusal to keep playing the same role in the same story. It is the courage to walk away from what is familiar, even when the familiar feels safer than the unknown. The cycle has power only because we continue to participate in it. When we step out, when we refuse the same dynamics, when we no longer bend to the same conditions, the pattern cannot survive. It dissolves because it is no longer fed by our compliance. Breaking repetition is not only an external act, but an inner transformation. It is the moment we stop betraying ourselves. We stop silencing the voice within, stop ignoring the truth that rises in our chest, stop giving away what was never meant to be surrendered. It is an act of reclamation, gathering all the scattered fragments of ourselves and saying, I choose differently now. The old path ends here. From this soil, something new can grow. The beauty of breaking the cycle is that it turns pain into wisdom. What once wounded us becomes the very ground of strength. We see with new eyes, recognizing the red flags we once ignored, honoring the intuition we once silenced, protecting the self we once abandoned. Life may present the same lessons again, but this time we walk differently, and the wheel cannot capture us anymore. Instead of being pulled into the old story, we write a new one, built not on wounds, but on worth. The cycle of repetition ends with a declaration that echoes through the soul. No more of this suffering, no more of this silence, no more of this diminishing. It is the moment the old chains fall, and the spirit steps into freedom, carrying forward the wisdom that every repetition was not wasted but was the very path that led us to awakening. The birth of the uncrushable self is not a sudden explosion of strength, but the slow rising of a truth that has always lived within. It begins quietly, after the storm of breaking patterns, after the tears of saying no more, after the exhaustion of carrying wounds for too long. What emerges is not a mask of toughness or a shell of indifference, but a deeper knowing that the essence of the self cannot be destroyed. Pain may scar it, rejection may wound it, life may test it, yet beneath every experience lies a core that remains whole. This is the self that awakens when self-love is no longer conditional but rooted in something eternal. To arrive at this self, one must walk through the fire of loss, betrayal, or neglect, and discover that survival is not enough. Transformation is required. The uncrushable self is not built by avoiding pain, but by allowing pain to carve wisdom into the soul. Every heartbreak becomes a teacher, every disappointment a mirror, every wound a doorway. When the lesson is taken, when the wound is honored rather than denied, something remarkable happens. The wound no longer defines us, it strengthens us. What once threatened to destroy us becomes the very soil where resilience takes root. This uncrushable self is not arrogant. It does not shout for validation or demand recognition. Its power lies in its quiet certainty. It knows its worth without needing others to confirm it. It stands tall even when unseen. It speaks truth even when unheard. It continues to shine even when misunderstood. Its love for itself is not fragile because it is no longer tied to outcomes, relationships, or achievements. It is a love that simply exists, unshaken by the changing winds of circumstance. When this self is born, fear begins to lose its grip. Fear of rejection fades because acceptance is no longer begged for. Fear of abandonment loosens because the self is no longer abandoned from within. Fear of failure diminishes because the flame of worth is not tied to success. The uncrushable self does not deny fear, but it does not live in servitude to it. It carries fear gently, like a passing shadow, but never lets it decide the path forward. This shift opens doors that once seemed locked, for when fear no longer dictates, possibility expands. Relationships also transform in the presence of this self. No longer do we chase love that costs our dignity or settle for bonds that drain our spirit. We do not confuse attachment with affection or endurance with devotion. Instead, we attract connections that resonate with truth, partnerships that honor rather than consume, communities that uplift rather than diminish. For the uncrushable self knows what it deserves, and by embodying that truth, it draws the same energy from the world. Where once there was desperation, now there is choice. Where once there was silence, now there is voice. Where once there was surrender, now there is sovereignty. The birth of the uncrushable self is also the return of wholeness. The fragments of the past are no longer scattered across memories of rejection or shame. They are gathered, integrated, and loved. The self no longer hides pieces of its story in fear of judgment. It carries its history with reverence, knowing every moment of neglect, every shadow of repetition, every scar of betrayal was part of the alchemy that gave rise to strength. Nothing is wasted, nothing is broken beyond repair, everything is woven into the fabric of resilience. To live as this self is to walk with a different posture, not outwardly but inwardly. There is a calm, unshakable presence that radiates without effort, a dignity that does not waver, a light that cannot be dimmed. The world may still challenge, test, and wound, but these storms no longer define the soul. They only remind it of its unbreakable nature. The uncrushable self is not invincible against pain, but it is invulnerable to destruction, for it knows the eternal truth. I am whole, I am worthy, I am unshakable, and no force outside of me has the power to crush what is sacred within. The journey of awakening begins with the boundary, that sacred line drawn not to push others away, but to protect the essence of the soul. By declaring no more, we step out of captivity and into freedom. It is the first act of loyalty to ourselves, the recognition that dignity and truth deserve a place in every breath we take. Without that boundary, we remain dissolved into the demands of others, but with it, we reclaim the shape of who we are meant to be. Yet the boundary alone is not enough. We must turn inward and face the shadow of self-neglect. We must see clearly how often we have abandoned our own needs, silenced our own voices, and carried burdens that were never ours to bear. These shadows do not come to punish us. They come to reveal the places where we have forgotten our worth. By recognizing them, we break the chains of false virtues that taught us love means erasure and peace means silence. Naming the shadow is the first light of freedom, the moment we stop betraying ourselves in the name of acceptance. As we move through shadow, the inner flame of worth begins to awaken. It is not fragile, for it does not depend on praise or recognition. It has always been there, steady and waiting, hidden under the ashes of rejection and fear. When we breathe into authenticity, when we live with courage to be who we truly are, this flame grows. It becomes the anchor of our being, the quiet assurance that we are enough. No storm of the external world has the power to extinguish it, because it burns from a truth deeper than circumstance. Still, the lessons of life return in circles. The same wounds echo through new faces, new places, new circumstances, until we rise and break the cycle of repetition. This is not a cruelty of fate, but the mercy of a teacher who will not let us remain asleep. Every repetition calls us to see the pattern, to stop playing the old role, to choose differently. And when we finally declare no more with full awareness, the wheel stops. The cycle dissolves. The pattern loses its power, and we are no longer bound by the story of our wounds. From this fire of transformation, the uncrushable self is born. It is not hardened by bitterness, but strengthened by wisdom. It does not cling to approval, nor does it shrink from disapproval. It carries itself with quiet dignity, rooted in a love that cannot be diminished. The uncrushable self knows that storms will come, but storms cannot destroy what is eternal within. Pain may visit, but pain becomes a teacher, not a master. Rejection may appear, but it cannot erase inherent worth. The uncrushable self is the one who has walked through shadow and flame, through cycles and endings, and emerged whole, sovereign, and free. The conclusion of this journey is not the end, but the beginning of a new way of living. To say no more is to awaken into a love for the self that no force can crush, no circumstance can weaken, no rejection can undo. It is the reclamation of the sacred within, the declaration that we will no longer betray ourselves for the sake of belonging, that we will no longer confuse survival with love, that we will no longer dim our light to comfort the world. From this place, every step we take becomes an act of freedom, every choice a testament to worth, every breath a reminder that we are whole.